joint approach to some of the security issues that we're facing in the Caribbean. So CBSI Connect was a way to promote law enforcement information sharing across the Caribbean region.
Avero?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Start now.
Could you restart first, please?
Start now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Start now.
Yeah. Can you restart, please? Thanks.
CBSI Connect system is one of our main regional projects under the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, which started in 2010 and was a recognition by the CARICOM states, the Dominican Republic and the United States, that we needed a joint approach to some of the security issues that we're facing in the Caribbean. So CBSI Connect was a way to promote law enforcement information sharing across the Caribbean region.
CBSI Connect allows each institution to act independently with its own independent portal site, but also replicate credentials to a shared site where collaboration and learning can take place among all participating institutions.
Through the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, we've started several regional programs, whether that's justice sector training, training on ballistics investigations, or law enforcement investigations training. And through CBSI Connect, these trainings can be broadcast to all member states.
Academies, agencies have been using it. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants for courses.
The knowledge that has been gained in the field, the knowledge that has been gained in the region can be shared, and that sharing and that collaboration is what makes this a very special asset moving forward for Caribbean law enforcement.
CBSI Connect users can either view our trainings at the academies themselves that are installed conference centers, or they can even use it at their laptop, on their laptops at home. And I believe we now also have mobile capability, so it is truly a training system that's accessible anywhere.
We have regular meetings with heads of academies. We meet regularly with agencies in the region. We get their input into courses and programs that are being offered on CBSI Connect.
Trafficking in people, trafficking in drugs, trafficking in money transcends the participating institutions in the region and truly becomes regional problems. The sharing of information, shedding sunlight, sharing expertise is a very important tool in combating these issues.
We've seen several positive impacts from the availability of training on CBSI Connect. One of them, of course, is a travel cost savings, because you no longer have to spend a day traveling and buy an expensive flight to go receive a training at another academy.
The training that has been done on CBSI Connect for law enforcement officers has had tremendous response. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants on CBSI Connect. We have had academies putting more courses on CBSI Connect. We have had training every month on CBSI Connect.
We encourage the use of the system for both internal training and external training, and we are trying to build out the library of available courses stored on the system, and we encourage our member states to upload their individual training which they want to share with the community.
If there are courses that are available that pique your interest, that could enhance your job, your ability to perform your duties as a professional over CBSI Connect, seek them out. Participate, engage. This is really the value of what this technology brings to the region.
And that has allowed different academies to build much stronger ties with each other and cooperate on shared law enforcement challenges in the region.
His Excellency Ad Beesbrook, Ambassador, Delegation of the European Union, Trinidad and Tobago, Her Excellency Enga Rhonda King, Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the United Nations, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones, Acting Executive Director, CARICOM IMPACS, Ms. Marina Walter, UN Resident Coordinator for Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin, Dr. Joy St. John, Executive Director, Caribbean Public Health Agency, Captain Errington Sherland, Executive Director, Regional Security System, Mr. Earl Harris, Assistant Director, Strategic Services, CARICOM IMPACS. Good morning to everyone, and welcome to our first virtual session for this week's event, Peace, Security, and Development, a Roadmap for the Future. I am Suzanne Sipasad, Regional Training Advisor for CBSI Connect Learning Management System. I know you have just seen the video that highlight the relevance and features of CBSI Connect. I am therefore confident that you recognize that the CBSI Connect platform is an important networking tool for law enforcement officers in our region. Over the last year, and especially in this time of COVID-19, when protocols are in place to restrict gatherings, CBSI Connect have grown in terms of its usage and relevance in the Caribbean. I am therefore happy that the transition has begun to hand over the platform to CARICOM IMPACS, an agency that is well respected within the region. I know that the sessions this week will be informative and reassuring as we discuss the region's roadmap for the future. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Joycelyn Hughes, Border Security Specialist at CARICOM IMPACS, who will be bringing remarks from CARICOM IMPACS.
Good morning. Thank you, Suzanne. Good morning, all. CARICOM IMPACS, as Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, is pleased to welcome you to our week-long live virtual CARICOM Security Conference titled Securing Our Caribbean Community Within the Era of COVID-19 and Beyond. The crisis presented by the COVID-19 pandemic is unprecedented in the world and CARICOM. In an effort to understand how the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly impacted the security environment, as well as to identify best practices that can be applied to similar situations in the future, CARICOM IMPACS will this week bring together a network of leaders, practitioners, experts, government officials, academics, private sector representatives, and civil society officials to exchange views and discuss the pandemic. The week-long conference includes 12 interactive webinars focusing on key security priorities such as peace, security and development, criminality and organized crime, policing, cybersecurity, the future of borders, migration and mobility, climate change, corrections and prison services, the blue economy, maritime security, and building resilience in small island developing states, among others. The exchange of views, perspective, and ideas this week will feed into a publication on lessons learned, best practices, and guidance document for preparing for and responding to global threats such as pandemic and other crises. This live session titled High-Level Virtual Panel, Peace, Security and Development, a Roadmap for the Future, will provide an opportunity to hear from regional security leaders and key supporting partners on the role their organizations are playing in the fight against COVID-19, as well as challenges that confront them. The session will also analyze the impact of the pandemic on existing peace, security, and development in CARICOM. Panelists will consider various dimensions of the challenges posed to government, regional organizations, and international partners. I welcome you to seize the opportunity to actively participate in this conference. CARICOM IMPACS is committed to advancing the regional peace and security. I will now like to invite our distinguished moderator, Mr. Earl Harris, Assistant Director, Strategic Services, CARICOM IMPACS, to continue this live session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes. I think I can safely say at this point all protocols have been observed. And in the interest of time, I now invite Dr. St. John to lead today's discussion.
Thank you very much. And let me know if you see my slides. Are you seeing them?
Yes, we are.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for this opportunity to be involved in this important conference. And I want to focus in my presentation on these areas that you see before you on the screen, so that I give you an idea of what has happened, how it has evolved, and what are some of the important ways that we have found in working in addressing the impact and mitigating that impact of COVID-19 in the CARICOM region. So I wanted to start first with this whole look at these Sustainable Development Goals, and Goal 16 looks at peace, justice, and strong institutions. And you will see that this whole issue of protection during natural disasters, well, COVID isn't natural, and he's not yet produced a disaster in the Caribbean. So we're going to try to fight to avoid that. I show you this to give you an idea of what has been happening with CARFA in its support of the region. And it really started in November 2019, not because we knew about COVID, but epidemics were placed in tier 3 of the strategic threats and risks to the region. And then along came COVID. And you see a lot of work has been done before we had our first cases and even since. And you will see from the trajectory of the graph at the top that we are having cases, but still it is not as bad as it could have been. And why is this? Because CARFA managed this from a security perspective, help security to be specific. And as we are part of the security cluster, you will see this timeline, which shows that we have had a great interface with the different elements of the security sector, including the ministers. And we're going back again now that we are in what looks like our second wave beginning to start. And none of this has been done outside of the remit of CARICOM in its widest sense, not just CARICOM, the organization, the headquarters that you see before you, and the CARICOM institutions, but also the governance arrangements through the Conference of Heads of CARICOM. And these agreements on the right all came towards buttressing the common efforts that had started with the ministries of health. So there was a desire for regional solidarity, the development of interregional travel protocols, joint procurement of medication supplies and equipment, and of course, food security. But despite the fact that there has been a common effort, and despite the fact that this has been an all of society approach, there are still some response challenges. And before you will see the response challenges, and I will give you some insight into what CARFA has been doing along with the member states to support the region in overcoming these challenges. And the first thing that I want to tell you is that this has been a collaborative effort. And the sectors involved are before you. There are more, but these are the main ones. And you will see bottom right, maintaining governance. And why should governance be something of interest to a public health institution? Because you have to be able to have leadership, not just at the CARICOM level, as the CARICOM heads have so ably displayed, but even within individual organizations. You must have people who know how to make things work, even in these COVID times. And this slide gives you an idea of the partners that CARFA has had along this journey. And that envelope and the four entities named, these are our main international development partners who have funded the efforts so far. And at the bottom, you will see the ones who have collaborated with us, both technically and also in the planning of this sector-wide approach. I go now to a deeper dive into what has been happening with tourism. Now, CARFA was already involved in a partnership, specific partnership with Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, but we added the other partners that you see here to develop the COVID-19 Tourism Task Force, and we're building on a foundation that CARFA's Tourism and Health Program had over the years. Never waste a crisis. And so what we have done is develop a set of guidelines for safe reopening. This is in the background of standards of operation that we are working on through CrossQ, standards for the region. And you will see there's some specifics that have been added for the COVID-19 situation. On the right, voluntary self-reporting. There is a Tourism and Health Information System COVID-19 app and the Caribbean Travel Health Assurance stamp for a healthier, safer facility. These are some specifics to the COVID-19 scenario. So remember I told you that the heads requested some requirements for moving safely, and these are them in a nutshell before you. You will notice on the left, we start off with this whole issue of negative COVID-19 tests, and in the Caribbean, the gold standard, and the only test right now that detects active disease is PCR. And so this whole issue of knowing your status as you move through the region is critical. Of course, there are issues such as what are the hotspots along the journey from the time you come to the airport where you're leaving your country to when you come into our countries, our space. And so there's the increased screening, the issues of social distancing, the wearing of facial coverings, masks, and staying at home if you're ill. And of course, these are all subject to the national guidelines, quarantine. And then there are the measures on the right. You will see that there's a categorization of countries into low, medium, and high risk with different requirements. And also there is the aspect of specialized teams, including first responders, like security services that would have to be moving throughout the region. What are some of the other things that we have done in collaboration with our partners? And CARICOM IMPACS has been a very important partner in making sure that we get to our security services to ensure that we strengthen their systems in infection prevention and control. And there's been training of over 500 law enforcement professionals in the correct use of PPE and the proper use of PPE in the front line, among other things that you see here. Then there has been the collaboration with groups, the systems through sectoral action. There is the regional level core coordination group, PAHO, SEDIMA leads that group, and CARFA, OECS, CARICOM, Secretariat join the tourism task force that I spoke of before. And because this is a heavily clinical issue when it comes to the patient, doctor interface, an expert advisory group of professionals drawn from the region have advised us. And then the issue of health information systems was another area of weakness. And again, never waste a crisis. We have used the experiences with COVID to try to strengthen information systems and to add layers onto the service that we give in terms of the surveillance of illness in the region. And I'm showing you the situation report that we produce every other working day. I spoke before of the travel protocols, and this shows the infographics that we have on the cover of the protocols that we released last week. And on the right, you will see the RSS that has been giving yeoman service, especially through the lockdown, to ensure that samples get to CARFA for testing. The other issue has been procurement. First, access, and then the actual price that we can pay. And there was a decision for a pooled procurement mechanism. This was devised by the group mandated by CARICOM, and CARFA assisted SEDEMA with a formula for parceling supplies based on not just the NCD burden, because NCD is a critical risk factor in the development of severe and critical forms of COVID-19, but also based on risk factors of NCDs like obesity and smoking, and also based on the percentage of older persons in population, so that there is an apportioning of what is procured in the pool based on the burden to each country. SEDEMA now operates a hub, and you will see on the right some pictures of SEDEMA, their staff and partners such as CDB and the Government of Canada, who have supported the development of the hub. And I think this is the final slide. We cannot speak to COVID-19 and what we are going to do going forward without the recognition of the hurricane season. And even if we do not get hurricanes, we still have severe weather events, flooding, etc. And so this whole issue of disaster preparedness in COVID-19 is one that has occupied CARFA in its support to SEDEMA for a hurricane preparedness. So we've developed a roster of experts that can respond if we have an event. There is the actual hurricane season preparedness activities of CARFA, again, alongside COVID, assisting with the protocols for safe use of shelters, for example. And we cannot forget Aedes aegypti. So we have also wrapped up the work to ensure that there is vector control ongoing. And so in a roadmap going forward on how we will ensure good health, peace, and health security in COVID times, it's going to be important for us to have an all of society approach with clear leadership, even at the community level, and preservation of that leadership, partnerships with a clear understanding of the overall situation and how it impacts on every sector, and appropriate sectoral fit for purpose protocols to allow us to live with COVID. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. St. John. We'll hold our questions and discussions for after everyone has had a chance to speak. We move immediately on to Ambassador Beesbrook, who will give us some insights into the role the EU has been playing locally and regionally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. And also thank you for the invitation to participate at this panel session, which I think is very important and timely. And to frame my presentation, I think I would like to share with you a development diagy, which is that you cannot have development if you do not have security. And it is difficult to have security if there's no development. And the reason I'm saying this is because the coronavirus crisis is one that attacks both our security environment, our health perspective, from a health perspective, but is also attacking our development perspectives through reduced economic activities, but also related stress on our socio-economic framework. And I think we have all seen, and I think we still see every day, how devastating the virus is. It is devastating from a health perspective. And I think we all know the images of the hospitals and nursing homes in Spain and Italy that struggle to cope with the influx of new patients. We've seen the video clips on social media of exhausted medical workers, and they battled non-stop to save lives. And although we have seen flattened curves of positive cases in Europe, the crisis is still deepening in many other countries, and the number of cases is growing ever more rapidly. I was watching Health Minister Deo Singh on Saturday when he mentioned that they had just reached the cap of 16 million seropositive cases worldwide, whereas it was only days before that the cap of 15 million people had been reached. The virus is also devastating from a socio-economic perspective. And I look at the data that are provided by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And in their update in mid-July, they said that the regional impact of COVID-19 is on growth matters, economic growth, is estimated at minus 7.1%. That is for Trinidad and Tobago, whereas for the region, it is projected at 5.4%. And if you go back to May in their previous estimates, they were talking about an economic contraction in Trinidad and Tobago of 5% and 2.5% in the Caribbean region. So you see that economic impact is becoming stronger and stronger. But also the virus is potentially devastating from a solidarity and collaboration point of view. And I saw a recent interview with EU Commission President Mrs. von der Leyen, and she said that in Europe we were looking into the abyss. Health systems were on the brink of collapse. Companies had lost their income due to the economic lockdown. Employees lost their jobs or were at risk of losing their jobs. But also member states were fighting over procurement of medical face masks in the beginning of the crisis. And they were also adopting measures without consulting each other on closing borders. And that affected movement of people and goods across the borders. But we also took away some lessons from that because we learned that individual member states are in a weaker position if they have to address the crisis on their own. And they also learned that it's beneficial to assist each other. And that is when we started to see doctors and nurses from less affected countries working alongside their peers in Italy and Spain. And we saw seriously ill Dutch patients being taken care of in intensive care units in Germany because simply there were not enough in the Netherlands. And we also understood that if we are to overcome the virus and the crisis, we must cooperate, not only within Europe, but also with countries beyond the European Union. And to this end, the Union has put together a collective, coordinated and coherent global response to the pandemic, bringing together EU institutions, but also the member states, what we call Team Europe. And at the core of the Team Europe approach is a strong message of European solidarity with partner countries and the Union's resolve to exercise global leadership for sustainable recovery. And the approach that is being followed is multi-pronged. First of all, we must help people who fall sick with the virus, and we must find ways to protect those that have not yet been infected. And we need to look especially at the more vulnerable members of our societies. And that means we do not only look at taking decisions concerning confinement measures or travel restrictions, but we also must try and find ways to assist countries that were or are struggling with the crisis. And in countries where we already had ongoing health programs, they were adjusted to react to the immediate needs that resulted from this crisis. At global level, the EU provided additional financing to the World Health Organization and to the Pan American Health Organization to assist with their pandemic response capabilities. Well, in the Caribbean, and Dr. St. John already mentioned it, we supported CARVA. We provided 8 million euros to provide testing and lab material, protective equipment, but also to increase the staffing levels so that CARVA could ensure higher numbers of tests could be ensured. Another example for the Caribbean is that in Jamaica, 29 ventilators were purchased under an ongoing EU program. Second element we need to look at is that we must fight the virus. We need to develop medication that can cure seropositive persons, and we need to develop a vaccine that helps build immunity in people. And Commission President von der Leyen pledged an EU contribution of 300 million euros to the Gavi Vaccine Alliance last June. And that is a 50% increase in the previous EU contribution to Gavi. The Global Vaccine Summit that took place on the 4th of June also saw the launch of an advanced market commitment for COVID-19 vaccines, which is a new financing instrument to provide access to COVID-19 vaccines for low and middle income countries at the moment a vaccine reaches the market. And in May, the Commission launched a global pledging campaign to accelerate and scale up the development and production of COVID-19 vaccines, medicines, and diagnostics, and to ensure universal and equitable access. And again, with a special focus on vulnerable countries. That campaign raised 9.8 billion euros. And in June, under the patronage again of the President von der Leyen, Global Citizen initiated a global pledging summit, which raised an additional 6.15 billion. So altogether, pledges have been made to address this crisis to the tune of 16 billion euros. And the third dimension we need to look at is that we need to address the social and economic impact of the lockdowns and the confinement measures. Now, and to address the immediate needs, we have been looking in our partner countries into ongoing programs to see whether they could be reoriented, where that was possible, and to build in a COVID-19 dimension. And this was done globally in most of our partner countries. Now, you may have also heard that the EU heads of state and government agreed last week on a new multi-annual budget covering the period 21 to 27, amounting to more than €1 billion. And they also agreed on a recovery package of 750 billion euros. Now, part of that budget will be available for our external relations. And over the last weeks, I've been consulting with local stakeholders here in Trinidad and Tobago to gauge the perspectives for the post-COVID-19 recovery and transformation process, to identify the medium-term needs and to make suggestions to Brussels for our programming exercise that will start in the coming months. And my colleagues in the Caribbean and in the other delegations have done the same in the countries for which they are responsible. And that should prepare the ground for more concrete programming discussions over the coming months to determine what our medium-term support packages could look like. Now, to recap the EU approach, it's one, working together within the EU, but also beyond with all our partner countries to fight the immediate health crisis, to help the vulnerable people. We need to support research for medication and a vaccine. And we need to develop a way forward to transform and accelerate the economy to address the socio-economic impact. And we're looking to partnering with all our partner countries, but also international partners and regional organizations to move this agenda forward over the coming few years. And I'm looking forward to answer any further questions that may come up in the panel discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now invite Her Excellency Rhonda King, our permanent representative on the UN Security Council.
Thank you, Moderator Harris. All protocols observed, let me begin by expressing my appreciation for this invitation to participate in today's discussion alongside our very esteemed panelists. I wish to also express my condolences to the government and people of our sister nation, Barbados, on the untimely passing of former Prime Minister Owen Arthur. I think we all agree that we have lost yet another committed regionalist. May he rest in eternal peace. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we meet during extremely challenging times. The worst global pandemic in over a century continues to test the resolve of many of us across the world as it destroys lives and livelihoods. Meanwhile, the slow onset of the climate crisis leaves our Caribbean community with a cloud of uncertainty looming overhead. At times like these, multilateral cooperation, solidarity, and unity of purpose are essential for our survival as nations, regions, and as an international community. As a matter of international public policy, it has long been established that peace, security, and development are mutually reinforcing. The United Nations system was founded on three interconnecting pillars: peace and security, development, and human rights, with the governing principle of the rule of law intersecting each pillar. From a standpoint of doctrine, the most pertinent example of the peace, security, development nexus can be found in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which remains the primary blueprint for a just, equitable, and prosperous world, and remains one of the outstanding achievements of multilateralism in recent times, and perhaps can be considered a standout achievement of the UN's 75 years of existence. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has exposed and exacerbated vulnerabilities and inequalities both within and among countries, and threaten to derail many of the gains made with the Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic has also revealed the fragilities of many systems upon which we so heavily depend, from travel and trade to health and other critical institutions. The multilateral system has also been placed under immense pressure as some countries have adopted an inward-looking posture, foregoing cooperation and choosing instead to focus only on their narrow self-interest at a time when collective action is most needed. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has always been a tireless advocate of international law. In our role as an elected member of the United Nations Security Council, we continue to advocate for the principles of sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and political independence, while advancing the perspective of a small island developing state. This perspective encompasses the financial vulnerabilities of small open economies, the security risks of porous borders, the legacies of underdevelopment left in the wake of colonialism, the contemporary challenges of an unbalanced multilateral system that continues to favor the powerful, and the acute threats of climate change. Yet, despite our historic bundle of vulnerabilities, we believe that our voice is an important one. At a time when there is fragmentation across the multilateral system, the plight of the vulnerable needs to be clearly heard. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has taken up this mantle to advocate on behalf of all small island developing states and our counterparts from the global south for pragmatic solutions and principled partnerships that address the root causes of insecurity through multidimensional strategies across the peace, security, and development nexus. A typical example of the nexus can be seen in the international community's response to the situation in our CARICOM sister island, Haiti. Over the years, Haiti has made meaningful efforts to develop, but has been beset by monumental setbacks, which has caused the country to divert its limited resources from socio-economic development programs to security-related programs and vice versa, resulting in the failure of various development initiatives. External shocks, such as the 2008 global financial crisis, natural disasters, and the current COVID-19 pandemic, have worsened the security situation and aggravated the socio-economic and political situation in the country. These, together with its structural and institutional challenges, have regrettably contributed to Haiti's underdevelopment and constrained the state's effectiveness to achieve the long-term development objectives. The Haitian National Police is a prime example in this regard. The NP has undergone various reforms, but still lacks appropriate financing and capacity to respond effectively to Haiti's security threats. As a result, the international community's engagement in the country is multi-pronged. The UN Security Council mandated special political mission provides demilitarization and arms management, electoral and political processes, rule of law and judicial assistance, and support to policing. The UN country team assists the Haitian authorities in building capacities and strengthening institutions, while the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, ad hoc advisory group on Haiti provides advice on long-term development strategies to promote socio-economic recovery, reconstruction, and stability in accordance with national plans and priorities. This multi-dimensional support system is a typical example of the peace, security, development nexus in action. One of the principal lessons that COVID-19 has underlined is that in our increasingly globalized and interconnected world, crises create multiple stress points across social, economic, and political systems. These risks present themselves simultaneously in a manner that easily overwhelms the capacities of states, especially in the developing world, where many of us are still at the early stages of development and have limited resources at our disposal to address the numerous and complex challenges that emerge. For vulnerable countries, as scarce financial resources are diverted towards addressing the immediate health needs and providing social protections, opportunities costs emerge whereby important development plans and programs become underfunded and the social contract ruptures. At these crucial moments, there is an urgent need for the donor community, including international financial institutions, to scale up development assistance to vulnerable countries in order to ensure that they are not left behind and they are able to strengthen social protections. Security risks never occur in a vacuum. They most often materialize where there are pronounced inequalities of power that prevent compromise and produce social divisions. Security is therefore a collective project where conflicting parties make an active and intentional choice to abandon conflictual relationships and cooperate for mutual benefit. Security can therefore never be imposed. It must be internalized as parties build trust and reconcile their differences. For peace and security to be sustainable, the state and all other guarantors in conflict resolution process must repair and reinforce the social contract on which peace relationships are constructed. This could only be done by advancing the peace, security, and development nexus. Indeed, we can have no peace without development and no development without peace. The two are inextricably linked. I thank you.
And Excellency, we thank you. Certainly food for thought, and I think you're echoing some of the sentiments of Ambassador Beesbrook. I now invite Ms. Marina Walter, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Trinidad and Tobago, to address us. Ms. Walter.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All protocols observed, and thank you so much for having me here. I think as was also already expressed by Ambassador King and Ambassador Beesenbrook, it's very important that CARICOM Impacts has called for this meeting, because more than ever we feel that while there's a tendency for countries to look inwards and close ranks in the fear and across looking at the pandemic of COVID-19, the need to collaborate and cooperation across countries, across the region is more necessary and more important than ever. So I really want to congratulate for calling for this meeting and bringing us all together in this virtual space. Look, just quickly, as of course many of you have heard, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in his call for solidarity, described COVID-19 as a human crisis, but also underscored that more fundamentally, we need to focus on people and in particular on the most vulnerable during these times. The UN's approach, therefore, has focused on supporting national authorities, of course, in the immediate health response across the region, across the globe, but also really to address the needs of the most vulnerable people while ensuring that term that we like to use a lot, no one is left behind. Looking at the wider region, what is worrisome is that the projected increase in poverty, inequalities, the social disharmony could lead to increased security risks and very much undermine the achievements so far made on Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. Therefore, we think the approach really needs to be one to also enhance and very much take serious the citizens' human security. For the United Nations here and the region around the globe, but also just focusing on the region, we have adjusted our programs to address some of the main challenges that we see existed in the region, but really very much were amplified by COVID-19 and the lockdown. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to quickly look at them. So one of the areas that we observe and with worrisome, so to say, emergent social unrest in some hotspot communities. While most parts of the region remain peaceful, of course, a loss of livelihoods and many forms of social and psychological stress induced by the pandemic have really heightened aggressive reactions towards government and at times the police in some high-risk communities. We saw it in Grenada, Curaçao, St. Lucia, but also Trinidad. In some countries with states of emergencies operations, Belize and Jamaica, concerns have risen also about the lack of observance of the law in handling suspects, as well as the sustainability of using kinetic force to treat violence without the appropriate social responses. And I think that has been something that's going around in the region. Allegations of violations against security forces, we have seen they've been raised in several countries, and all of that is still being under investigation. The key point here is what you offer after the forces have gone. What's the sustainable approach to this? The region also saw, of course, a number of elections. Guyana, Suriname, St. Kitts and Nevis had their general elections either before or during the COVID-19 emergencies. Trinidad and Tobago just coming up. Compared to the previous elections, the pre and post electoral context was a lot more tense. And we think that it was really also CARICOM's leadership that had been a critical factor to enhance the integrity of the electoral process during these times. So it's very, very well called for. However, with the COVID-19 socio-economic impact disrupting human security, opposition parties are now calling for early elections in countries with upcoming general elections. We're starting to see a rise in the trend of increased inter and intra-party quarreling and a weakened political consensus, which very often diverts the attention away from a sustained COVID-19 response. So it's a bit one of the trends that we are seeing. Very much, of course, what has our attention, I think everyone's attention, is are the issues around border security and migration-related vulnerabilities. They've been increasing. Many CARICOM countries have, of course, become model cases to the world, really, for flattening the curves of the COVID-19 infection. Trinidad has very much led the charge, if we can say that. However, the fact that most Eastern Caribbean countries rely on tourism continue to expose CARICOM countries to risks of new cycles of the pandemic, in particular since, of course, traditionally the bulk of tourists is from North America, and the fact that neighboring Latin and Central America is still a pandemic epicenter doesn't make it easier for the islands. Recent examples of tourism-induced risks included Antigua, Barbados, Bahamas, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And of course, with countries like Belize, Guyana, Suriname, and also Trinidad bordering Latin and Central American countries that are still very much struggling. The first wave of the pandemic introduces a constant risk, very much on high alert. One of the areas of our main concern is the protection for people that are of concern, that really need more protection. As we all know, there are several thousand persons of concern from Venezuela and other Latin American countries in Guyana, Trinidad, Tobago, Suriname, Aruba, and Curacao, who might not have been fully catered for by the COVID-19 stimulus packages provided by many governments in the region. The vulnerability of these groups to exploitation, negative coping mechanisms, non-communicable diseases, and other forms of risks have therefore really increased, and we see that quite a bit. To consider taking a more proactive stance to help persons of concerns will be important for governments in the region, because with a persistent irregular migration across the region, these groups' vulnerability may undermine the sustainable COVID-19 response in many of the countries and therefore threaten the human security of CARICOM citizens. So it's really a win-win by finding ways to cater more for the vulnerable at the fringe of society. Justice administration is also something that we see with slight concern. COVID-19 emergencies measures have further complicated the efficiency of justice administration. Many CARICOM countries' courts were forced to limit operational hours due to the need to safeguard the health of clients and workers. Though some migrated the cases to virtual courts, as it happened here in Trinidad and Tobago, in most countries, all trials by jury for criminal cases were suspended, while hearing delays were recorded in civil cases. In the prisons in particular, tracking reveals that there is an overcrowding in 6 out of the 15 prisons in the region, and that pre-trial detainees constitute at least 1/4 of the prison population. And obviously prisons are, so to say, highly attractive for the spread of COVID-19, had also led to unsuccessful, luckily, uprisings in prisons, at least in Trinidad and St. Lucia. And that's a situation that needs to be watched carefully, both by governments, but also anyone who can support on the response in prisons. Another area that's on the rise, cybercrime. The internet penetration in the region is at a relatively high at 64%, and vulnerabilities are advanced by a lack of comprehensive cybersecurity policies in most member states, and the high number of unsecured servers per capita. Now, reports from member states have come in that since the COVID-19 lockdown period, there's an indication of an increase in attempted COVID-19 stimulus fraud schemes, raising hate speech in the social media space, phishing attacks, and the dissemination of obscenities. In the new normal, which is what we're looking at for the time to come, countries in the region are likely to digitize their economies, therefore raising the risk levels related to cybercrime. So we feel that this is an area where all of us partners probably need to engage more forcefully in finding out how we can support countries in tying up a framework that allows for the better control of cybercrime. One area that we have followed up, and I think I'm also talking on behalf of our EU partners, since we are running regionally the Spotlight initiative against gender-based violence together, is really the issue of sexual and gender-based violence. In the pre-COVID phase, 3 of the top 10 recorded rape rates in the world occurred in the Caribbean, according to a report of UN Women. In 9 Caribbean countries, 48% of adolescent girls' sexual initiation was either forced or somewhat forced. So these rates are pretty worrying to start with. Now, conviction rate of sexual offenders have progressively decreased over the years. What was worrying that during the COVID-19 lockdown, we only saw officially Trinidad and Tobago reporting an increase on gender-based violence. But we think the reason for that is that in many of the Caribbean countries, the victims cannot operate in a context where they can report safely, where they can come forward. The referral pathways for survivors of gender-based violence is also broken with weakened law enforcement, lack of shelters very often, and no rehabilitation capacity, and really at times suboptimal coordination among government agencies. The lack of a conducive atmosphere inhibits victims from reporting and therefore exposing women more than ever in the region to the risk of violence. So just a few words, what have we been doing? Of course, for the United Nations in the region, the first response was really the support on the health side, really through PAHO, WHO, really backing up the governments and bringing the equipment, helping to monitor and helping to respond. So health came first. But now we're also much more putting the lens on the socio-economic long-term support and issues. Crime prevention is an area. UN agencies have been supporting, for example, young people in hotspot communities who have peculiar needs with psychosocial rehabilitation programs to keep them positively engaged during the COVID-19 lockdown. That ensures, again, hopefully, that no one is left behind. Electoral processes in Guyana, the UN Secretary General has issued several messages of solidarity to CARICOM, has consistently used his God offices to encourage actors in Guyana to respect the wishes of the people by abiding with the results of the election. Protection of persons of concern, of course. UN agencies very much have provided direct support immediately in and during the lockdown, provision of food, dignity kits, Medicare to refugees and migrants across the region, several the countries, to the people that are in the most vulnerable conditions, especially those who lost their jobs, many of them in the informal sector, to the COVID-19 socio-economic crisis. The continued support in this area will, of course, very much depend on the availability of funding. In the area of justice administration, UN agencies have provided immediate medical assistance, PPE, support equipment, but also training to prison authorities across the region to enable them to operate in a better manner. In addition, we have continued to support mediation structures to enable citizens to access alternative dispute resolution mechanisms during the times of COVID-19. Sexual gender-based violence, I already mentioned the EU-UN Spotlight initiative that has started to operate across the region, that was really used immediately to bring in support to civil society and that was in a position to reach out to victims in a more direct fashion. And continues to really try to be at the back end with more advocacy, sensitization, but on the ground, active support to victims and the civil society that is very much and very often the first point to call. Border security and cybercrime is, as said, that's one of the areas that we start seeing coming up. So that's an area we would like to explore much more with partners, what it means for CARICOM states in the future to operate in this space and to have a better grasp on controlling it. Just to end, what are some of the lessons learned for us that we're seeing with regards to how do you build back better following the COVID pandemic? Critical lesson for us is that in times of crisis, in times of this crisis, probably as it applies to most, the inputs of all stakeholders are critical to the success, which is why I said it's so important to get us all together today in this virtual venue and also the next 3 days. Notwithstanding the limited resources, the UN has made good impact, but it's really only if all partners pull together that we can successfully and effectively support countries in their challenge. Secondly, the very clearly COVID-19 crisis has revealed the need for all international partners to increase their investment in addressing social roots, the social roots of conflict and violence in the society. Leaving no one behind has never been more important, we think. Governments that fail to deal with vulnerable groups will face a greater risk. When leaving certain groups behind, fringe groups, the vulnerable groups that very often don't have a voice, the risk of a reinfection in the country is so much higher. And the risk of social unrest due to economic hardship is equally due to increase. Last but not least, as I said, there is just a clear sign that in these times of crisis, the need for greater cooperation among regional and international actors in addressing security challenges in the region is really the ask of the hour. And that's, I think, what we've been seeing, observing, and that we also hope to take as the one line forward in the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Walters. Your points are well noted. I'm sure it's going to lead to a lively debate after all presentations are made. I am happy now to invite Captain Errington Shirlan to address us.
Thanks very much, Earl. And thanks to IMPACS for inviting the Regional Security System, and greetings to my fellow panelists and viewers and participants on the various social media platforms. Let me at the outset say that I share Ambassador Beesbrook's and Ambassador King's perspective relative to the nexus between peace and security and development. One is not achievable without the other. Essentially, they are mutually reinforcing. Our region, the Caribbean region that is a zone of peace that is relatively safe and secure. Our historic ties and certainly our shared democratic values and principles contribute to that peace and stability. However, before COVID, and I'm looking now specifically through a security lens, the region remained highly vulnerable to transnational criminality, specifically illegal drug trafficking and the conjoined problems of the proliferation of illegal arms and rising level of violence. But COVID-19, being a wicked and complex problem, has presented some unique challenges, including new areas for transnational criminality. Additionally, it poses an immense threat to social and economic development and has the potential for undermining the fabric of our societies. The pandemic has certainly brought into stark reality the multi-dimensional nature of security challenges confronting our region, specifically economic security, health and human security, food security, and also environmental security. Individually, they each threaten the well-being of CARICOM countries, but together, I would suggest they threaten our very existence. I want to focus on three areas of vulnerability: cybersecurity, border security, and food security. And the UN representative, Ms. Marina Walters, would have spoken about the challenge of cybersecurity. As we ramp up more on remote business operations and increase online presence, that ramping up and certainly use of ICT has presented unique opportunities for cybercrime. Last month, the World Economic Forum noted that COVID-19 has increased the use of and reliance on the internet by as much as 50% in some market areas. It was also noted that cyber attacks have increased worldwide. There was data to suggest that there was an increase of 350% in the phishing of websites. What I would suggest is that there's a requirement to focus on building resilience in the cyber domain. Cybersecurity technology and service providers have to shift priorities to support current needs. For example, business continuity, remote work or work from home, and planning for transition to not the new normal, but the next normal. Countries in the region must be more agile in updating or developing national cybersecurity strategies, as well as their legal and regulatory framework regarding cyberspace. I would suggest, strongly so, that consideration be given to signing on to the Budapest Convention. It is the first international treaty seeking to address internet and computer crime by, one, harmonizing national laws, two, improving investigative techniques, and 3, increasing cooperation amongst nations. The Budapest Convention offers a legal basis and a practical framework for police to police and judicial cooperation on cybercrime and electronic evidence. The other area that I think is a vulnerability is the area of border security. The threat networks and bad actors of transnational organized crime they're well equipped to adapt to the COVID-19 climate. They're far better able to mobilize funds. They have boundless financial resources, I would suggest. They are not bound by regulations and treaties, and they ignore laws with impunity. And certainly, just as transnational organized crime does not stop at borders, similarly, the coronavirus does not. The importance of border security coordination and cooperation is even more critical as a consequence of COVID-19. The operational realities facing border security agencies in the first stages of the outbreak highlighted the need to step up capacities and technical assistance on health-related issues, including crisis management and contingency planning. There is evidence to suggest that there is a need for a better border management system at the national level. Secondly, I would suggest that countries need to cooperate better on early warning and risk management. And thirdly, the existing trend towards modernization needs to accelerate to improve the flow of real-time information and raise overall preparedness at our borders. In that regard, an overarching regional response mechanism that includes the development of plans for biological, chemical, radiological, and even nuclear hazards at the intermediate and national response levels must be considered. The last vulnerability that I would wish to touch on relates to food security. The 2020 Global Food Crisis Report estimated that food security has impacted over 18.5 million people in the Americas. There's a clear nexus between food security and national security. The inability of countries to import food because of a catastrophic decline in revenues and insufficient access to concessional financing and debt rescheduling will certainly lead to significant food shortages and has a potential for civil unrest. The onset of COVID-19 has underscored for our region and indeed for the global community to establish effective and meaningful collaborative mechanisms to anticipate global risks and threats, and to raise levels of readiness and to promote uniformity of response. What is critical for us, not only as a region, but as a global community, is to focus on information sharing, to focus on intelligence sharing, and that interagency and interstate cooperation. I would suggest that multilateralism is critical to wrestling COVID-19 to the ground. Thanks very much for your time, and I'm available to expand on those points or any other points with the remainder of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Sherwin. I think that's a perfect segue for Colonel Jones to wrap up the question session of this morning's event. He has had the advantage of listening to all the panelists. I'm sure he'll do an excellent job in summarizing and giving the CARICOM impacts perspective as we seek to address the concerns raised. Colonel Jones?
Thank you, Earl. There's also a disadvantage by going last when you have such eloquent and distinguished speakers that there is the trespass of repeating some of which was said, but I was heartened by some of their presentations because it confirmed to me that some of the things I'd wanted to talk about would have been on the right track. And so I will go into the presentation. And essentially to say that the contemporary crisis at the moment is that of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this is actually the second public health emergency of international concern within the last year. So as the last presenter, like you said, I thought I would approach the topic from a general perspective. As well, COVID-19 is the threat that we're dealing with today or right now. I'm sure there'll be other crises to be managed on our horizon very soon. It's somewhat almost like a decade type battle rhythm. We've had a global reset in 2001 when the Twin Towers came down. Again, there was another global reset in 2008 with the financial crisis. And we're here again in 2020. So certainly with that history behind us, one would anticipate that there should be something in whatever form manifested coming to us very soon. The United Nations, like the Caribbean community, addresses its global work around four main or thematic pillars, namely peace and security, development, and human rights, and more recently, climate governance. In 2015, world leaders would have agreed to 17 global goals, or officially known as the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs for short, to be achieved by 2030, that year again. Indeed, it would be fantastic to imagine a world, or far more better, to live in a world where there is no poverty, which is the SDG 1, or hunger, development goal 2, and equality across races and genders, which speaks to development goal number 5 and 10, and especially to be achieved in the next 10 years, which should be within most of our lifetimes, God willing. The establishment of these goals, however, weren't only recognized recently, but have been part or parcel of our collective aspirations for, I dare say, centuries. And whether we achieve any or all of them within the next 10 years, I think that these should continue to be the benchmarks for all of our regional governments. Yesterday, the 26th of July, which was a day of national significance in Barbados, commemorative of the riots on that day in 1937, and like throughout the region during that period of 1934 to 1938, where there were strikes or riots from as far west as British Honduras or Belize today to Trinidad and Tobago in the south. These agitations were for a better way of life for our disenfranchised people. If you were to look at development goal number 10, for example, it speaks to objectives in part such as ensuring equal opportunities and ending of discrimination, development of responsible migration policies, reduction of transaction costs for migrant remittances, etc., things that we can all relate to. Why is it, however, that in the 21st century still, that in many countries around the world, women are paid less in some jobs, though be just or better qualified than their male counterparts? We can speak about the hardships experienced by the Windrush generation, but the opportunities that were created to provide for the families back home, the Caribbean. But yet still, though all of our member state population growth rates are lower and slower to generate the critical mass to maximize its development potential, we still struggle with the full implementation of a CSME. We can break down each of these single development goals and see the program of work or milestones to be attained in order to achieve the level of security and development we seek. But I also think that it is important to realize that there is no prescriptive methodology for achieving the same, as the issues vary in intensity by country and would obviously be of a different priority to different governments. The approach has to be multidimensional in nature, and in all things, we recognize that if the Sustainable Development Goals are not adequately addressed, there's going to be a trickle-down effect which would affect society and socialization, peace and security, and ultimately development in this region. I believe, however, that as we embark upon the quest of achieving these goals, the strategies undertaken will all have a common ABC feature, an acronym. So A, awareness. Strategic goal of our crime and security strategy speaks about crime prevention, and one of our panelists earlier spoke about the same. IA, addressing the causes of crime and insecurity and increase public awareness of the key risks, which really is to say that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And given that security is a multidimensional concept that it is, there will be things that we know that we don't know. And there are things that we know that we don't know. And admittedly, there are going to be things that we don't know that we don't know. Which is why, one, it has to be a whole of society approach in dealing with these issues. And secondly, we have to change our approach and apply new tools in attempting to solve these issues. As an example, on Friday, we will present a paper demonstrating the use of an informational tool that utilizes big data to provide maritime domain awareness that prior to this, these non-obvious relationships or activities would have gone a-begging. So that leveraging technology, we're able to achieve goal number 6 of our crime and security strategy with the introduction of such tools into our product mix or arsenal. If I was to quote Boyne and Lagadak, who wrote a paper in 2000 entitled Preparing for the Future, Critical Challenges in Crisis Management, they wrote, and I quote, "The first and indispensable step is to get the problem of crises and breakdowns on the agenda of top-level decision makers." And I'm particularly happy that we have such distinguished colleagues on this panel today. And we will also be joined later on this afternoon by several of our regional leaders and the Secretary General for the Caribbean Community to speak to the challenges of this particular crisis and charting a way ahead for the region. The B is what I refer to as brotherhood or partnership, which again is the development goal number 17. And all of the representatives that you heard spoke earlier mentioned this in some form or format. One of the things I'm most particularly grateful for coming out of this crisis is that it affords us the opportunity to work most closely with our regional entities. You heard Dr. St. John spoke earlier about the work that her agency was doing with CTO and CrossQ and so on. We've had similar experiences as well. Like I said, the crisis created the opportunity to create greater awareness of their work and the relevance to our own. Likewise, I also want to express thanks to our international development and collaborative partners such as the EU, here represented by Ambassador Beesbrook, and the UN represented by Marina Walters. As an example of partnership or brotherhood, I recall us hosting the conference for the prisons. And again, you would have heard reference to the state of several of our prisons in the region. And we had that, I think we had this meeting on the 25th of March, when we heard basically of the state of preparedness and some of the concerns that they had. And essentially within 10 weeks at the most, we were able to write a paper requesting some assistance. And this was happily provided by the UK government, particularly from the High Commission in Trinidad. And essentially we use or piggyback the work that was being done by the RSS in ferrying samples from throughout the region into Trinidad for CARFA to complete the testing, to distribute much needed resources to the prisons throughout the region. Further, they were given the reach of the aircraft that they have. It was out of reach for countries such as Belize, Haiti, and Bahamas. And so again, in the true spirit of partnership, the French forces in the Caribbean region stepped up and provided assistance through the use of their Air 400 aircraft to distribute those much needed supplies to our further partners in the north and west. And it is these sort of things that we're talking about as it relates to partnership. There was a former commander of SOUTHCOM who used to say, essentially, in order for us, well, it basically takes a network to defeat a network. Earlier, you would have heard me made mention to Sustainable Development Goals number 10, and I should also have made mention of 10.6, which speaks to special and differential treatment for developing countries. And I'm particularly happy that on the panel here today that we have Her Excellency Ambassador King from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, not only representing St. Vincent, but all small island developing states in the global, basically affecting global decision making by the seat that they occupy on the United Nations Security Council. As my Jamaican friend Dave Walker used to say, we lickle, but we talawa. The sea is change that is disruptive. This pandemic has disrupted the way we work, play, and socialize. This conference being a typical example of the same. But to carry this further is really to get us to face some of the dogmatic perspectives that has hindered us in making progress in some areas. And I give a couple examples. The research or knowledge would have indicated that during the periods of lockdown, that there would have been an expected decrease in most crimes. One exception, however, would be that of domestic abuse. Such incidents of domestic violence, however, is hardly going to be reported or can be appropriately classified when the offender is a female or in instances of same-sex relationships, respectively. So that if the issues or problems are not properly framed, how then can we be sure that we're solving the right problems? Later in the conference, we would also learn that because of the disruptive change, we're going to have to think about changing the way we address some traditional and even new and emerging threats. In closing, I know most of us will be quite familiar with the song by Bob Marley, which was heavily influenced by the speech that was given by Haile Selassie at the UN General Conference in 1963, where he spoke about subhuman bondage. The Global Slavery Index in 2018 estimated that roughly 40.3 million individuals are currently caught in modern day slavery, with 71% of those being female and 1 in 4 being children. The song spoke about world citizenship, the color of one's skin, and this is quite contemporary in the period of Black Lives Matter. But the song, I guess you would figure by now, is war. And he says, essentially, until we address these things, then we are not going to know peace. So in essence, these will be my ABCs of any strategy, I think, that we're going to apply or adopt if we're going to be looking for the development and peace that we seek. Thanks, Earl.
Thank you, Colonel Jones. See, we have gone over a bit in terms of our time management, but as I always maintain, never sacrifice quality for expediency. We have spoken to varied topics, and we recognize in terms of how we structured the conference this week, a lot of the topics will be handled by other panelists later on. But I want to zero in on COVID in terms of how we are treating with it. Are we, and this I'm going to direct initially to Dr. St. John, because when we look across the world, people are indicating that we need to do more testing. So Dr. St. John, are we doing enough testing in the region? And what is the possibility of somebody coming down with the COVID, recovering, and becoming reinfected? I don't think there's much discussion pertaining to that. We seem to think that once we have recovered from the COVID, we are immune from reinfection.
So you've asked me two very heavy questions, but yes, we are doing enough testing across the region. And I think it isn't just plain numbers, but the way in which we approach who we test. And you know, in the region, we have been heavily relying on public health measures. So there is the whole issue of contact tracing, and also the issue of strategizing. The PCR gold standard test, which is used by most persons for their citizens and for the countries that are inviting tourists to their shores, it is not cheap, but still the numbers for the per capita rate are of, I would say, an acceptable level. And we've done some comparisons in the past. What we are looking for is not just the numbers tested, but the level of positivity of those that we capture who are positive to the overall number. And you would expect that that would increase as you have more transmission within your country. But our rates were more or less holding firm up until recently. In terms of that second question, I know that it is of great concern to many. And we have been looking very carefully at the scientific studies and also the advice from WHO. We have not yet got an indication that, first of all, there's more than one strain of COVID-19 that you can then be reinfected. I am talking about a scenario like dengue. There are 4 strains and you can be reinfected 4 times. We have not got an understanding that this is the scenario globally. The second is that COVID of itself as a virus is so complex that there is evolution in how we are learning about how COVID-19 affects persons. So we're watching very carefully for this whole issue of what kind of immune response persons mount if they do get COVID-19. And there have been anecdotal reports and claims, I should say, anecdotal claims by individuals, not supported by scientific study, that they contracted COVID-19 again. What seems to be happening is that the virus will, usually when it's an active case, early on in the active case, you get a very high viral load. And then it seems to almost submerge itself in the body system. But it can sometimes give off virus, or it can present its presence in very interesting ways. Some people have described gastrointestinal symptoms with diarrhea. Some people have described signs in your eyes. Apparently there are ophthalmologists who can detect COVID even before they're the classic symptoms. And of course, there are issues like COVID toes, various manifestations of rash and so on and so forth. So these seem to be almost like the virus reawakening in different parts of the body. and causing different symptoms, but it is still the same infection. So we have not got guidance from WHO, neither has there been the presentation of a scientific study which indicates that you can contract COVID again.
Thank you, Dr. St. John, for clarification. I got a question from a member of the audience indicating that they'd be interested in getting Ambassador Beesbrook's perspective on the amount of testing in terms of the EU opening its borders to various countries. I guess they want to know what protocols are in place or what are the requirements for the EU to reopen its borders.
Thank you. Sorry. I was interrupting you.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I was just going to say I'm going to be selfish and focus on CARICOM.
Right. Okay. Well, somehow I was expecting the question. So the decisions on whether people will be allowed into the European Union depends on the member states, because it is not a community competence, if you like. So the member states will determine under which conditions this will happen. They have issued a communication in June in which they set out how they want to assess that. So they will look at the number of new infections per 100,000 populations. They will look at the trend in infection rate, but they also look at the overall response to COVID-19 in the country. So, and goes from testing, surveillance, contact tracing, containment, treatment, and reporting. Now, I'm not entirely certain what the precise parameters are that they are using, but the only thing I do know that they have set as a parameter is that they will be looking at countries having an infection rate that is should not be higher than the average in the European Union. I think that is the starting point for the assessment. And then they will look at all the other criteria. The EU will do that every 2 weeks. They ask the delegations and the member states, certainly the presidency, to fill out questionnaires with answering a host of questions, determining to what extent the countries have taken the necessary steps to ensure that the risk to import the COVID virus into the EU is minimized. The precise details, I'm sorry, I won't be able to provide. This is something that is done at member state level and within the confines of the council.
Okay, thank you. And given the time we have left, and we are almost a minute out of time, but I'm sure you will grant me leave to, if we just go a bit over the established time, to ensure that we give the panelists a chance to at least answer one question. And I would like to direct this question to Excellency Rhonda King. We have a seat at the table at the UN Security Council. Is the region leveraging that seat efficiently to get our message out there? And I say that against the background that we oftentimes speak to sovereignty. And I'm looking at a development where the Cut Profits to Cuban Regime Act, which is directly impacting healthcare providers in Barbados and I think similarly in Trinidad and Tobago. We, as Colonel alluded, we have a session with our leaders, some of our leaders this afternoon. What message should we get to them? Or are you satisfied that we are leveraging our seat at the table efficiently, effectively?
Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Well, we are trying. We are tiny. We are well known for being outspoken. within CARICOM, outside of CARICOM, and certainly now in the Security Council. Is there more that we can do? Perhaps there is. But what I wanted to say that this is my I have the UN resident coordinator here, but there's a bee in my bonnet to just ask. We have tried to reverse something that the SG had said. The SG, in one of his many very important and constructive statements, said that the Latin America and the Caribbean region was the new epicenter for the, and we have had to try to get that reversed. And I'm not aware, because it's not the Caribbean, the Latin American region had been increasing the number of cases, but not the Caribbean. But that went out. So I just want to, it's a bee in my bonnet, because we have tried to reach out to the Secretariat to have that reversed, because it's quite damaging to our tourism sector, and it is not true. And you've heard what Dr. St. John has said. So while Marina is on the line, I would really like to hear her respond to that. But the short answer, Mr. Moderator, is that yes, we are trying. We are trying. We are sounding the alarm within the council, outside the council, for Haiti in particular, that Haiti needs debt relief to cope with the socio-economic fallout. So, and we can, perhaps what I'm learning here is that perhaps St. Vincent and the Grenadines can create a link to impacts, so that you can help guide us as to what some of the touchstone issues that we can help drive while we are there. So coming out of this, I think that we also need to collaborate more with impacts. So thank you.
Excellency, we accept your offer. And I'm sure Colonel Jones will officially appoint you an ambassador of impacts to take our message forward.
Moderator, this is Dr. St. John, may I say something? I actually have a slide. It wasn't ready at the time that I was presenting, but I actually have a slide which shows a comparison between the epidemic curves before we reopened our borders domestically and also for tourism, and now currently. So that can also be put up if you have any time.
Well, there's no time like the present, so if you want to put it up now. Hello? We seem...
Let me do that. I will do that.
Okay. And while you're loading, okay.
So what you see before you, the University of the West Indies has been plotting using public data, has been plotting the epidemic curves on a daily basis. I purposely removed the names of the countries, but the countries on the left for 11th May mirror the countries on the right for 27th July. And you will see that even though we have opened, there are not many countries that have had an appreciable change in their epidemic curves. And for the one or two that have, and I think the country has been mentioned, for the one or two that have, it's still not an epidemic curve akin to some of the ones that we're seeing in other regions of the Americas. So I just want to let you know that the public health measures are holding firm at the moment. I'm not sure if I'll be able to say this next week, but the public health measures are holding firm even after opening. So I'll just put that down now.
I think Ambassador King will reach out to you to get a copy of that slide to support her case. Because we recognize that we are small island developing states depending on tourism. And our leaders have to balance public safety with the economics. There are models to be followed in the world where people have taken the deliberate action to identify, isolate, treat, while simultaneously generating economic activity. I think that is the dilemma that our leaders face, which I intend to take up with them later this afternoon. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that we are into an above average hurricane season. And to bring Captain Sherland and Colonel Jones into the picture before we wrap, COVID will still be with us. We could have island states being hit by hurricanes, storms, flooding. And Dr. St. John, you recognize the yeoman service that the RSS has played in terms of transporting samples across the region. Are we doing any planning with that in mind when we may have to be now ferrying first responders to affected states? And how do we see ourselves managing the relationships with the partners? Take, for instance, the French, who came to our assistance, as Colonel Jones indicated, to send the PPE to Haiti and Belize. Is there any planning taking place?
You're asking me, or you're asking?
I'm asking the
my
I've asked you enough questions.
My colleague heads.
Captain Captain Sherland into the picture now, seeing that he's the headache.
I think, Earl, there was a request in the chat by Ms. Walters to respond quickly to Ambassador King. So before Marina loses her train of thought, I think a good way to follow on after that, with your kind permission, sir.
Well, I thank you for being my wingman. I knew I
Perfect. Let
As
me just
always.
note. Thank you so much. Now, just quickly, because I really, that is a super important point, and Ambassador King, just to clarify, we also saw that. So as you saw, the Secretary General published a report on Latin America and the Caribbean, and I can assure you that especially the resident coordinators in the Caribbean were the best advocates, basically saying, don't do that, because as always, it just doesn't fit. And in particular in COVID-19, so our feedback was immediately, no, that's a mismatch. And once you would look, of course, into the details of the brief, it's a lot more differentiating between some of the role models we saw in the Caribbean managing the crisis and Latin America, where there's a huge difference. And I think with what you just mentioned, what happened in this unfortunate, I think it was a tweet or something, is what happens a lot in the social media space. You have like 28 letters to summarize something. And thank God you commented, because we did too, saying, no, you cannot call the Caribbean epicenter. We're talking about Latin America, and we really have to start differentiating that. But you know that the brief was put together by ECLAC, which of course is a very strong office and team here in the Caribbean in Port of Spain. And so we discussed it, in fact, with Alicia Bacena, the head of ECLAC, last week. And she also said, true, full acknowledgement for the speed of how this brief was put together. We should have differentiated more. And the plan forward is now to work with the team in ECLAC in Port of Spain to do that, to tell the Caribbean story, which is a different one when it comes to the calm management, response, and control that many of the Caribbean governments, in fact, have shown. So we, in fact, fully aligned with you, and that was our immediate feedback. But it was one of those things, when they start summarizing it in a tweet, the report in itself did make the brief in itself did make the differences. But once you summarize it in a tweet, it's just not adequate. But in general, we completely, the resident coordinators in Barbados, Jamaica, all of us, our voice is fully aligned with you as saying, do not, throw in the same pot and continue to throw in the same pot Latin America and the Caribbean, because most of the time the stories to be told are very different. Over. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Captain Sheeran, you have 30 seconds. I have a strict timekeeper.
Okay. I think the COVID pandemic and the above average hurricane season presents a catch-22 challenge. We have to respond to COVID, and we also have to respond to any state that has been impacted by a severe weather system. The RSS will not stop doing the what I call the COVID flights, taking samples down to CARFA. But if a state is impacted, we are prepared to do so. We have stocked up on PPE. Dr. St. John would have mentioned that we've trained first responders. The RSS has worked collaboratively with SEDEMA to prepare the CARICOM Disaster Relief Unit. We at the RSS have additional PPE. We have developed a protocol, and this is very important. We've developed a protocol that focuses on protection of the forces that will be deployed, which enhances the training that has already been done. But along with their protection, we have arranged with the government of Barbados, assuming that we're going to be mobilizing from Barbados, for those individuals to be tested prior to deployment and after the deployment. And another important piece that I want to add is that we have circulated a protocol document that speaks to the basic psychosocial skills for first responders, recognizing that it is a difficult environment that you're going in with just the severe weather system, and COVID-19 then presents an additional challenge. So the right mindset of those individuals who are deployed and the protection of those individuals are two important areas. So to answer your question in a nutshell, are we prepared? Yes. Is it going to be a difficult situation? Yes. Can we not go? We have to go. It is not a question of not going. We have to go, and we will go.
Thank you, sir. And as we close, I know I am at time, but are there any closing remarks by any members of the distinguished panel before we bring this meeting to an official close? I'm giving you one last opportunity if we have missed out anything. Ambassador?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that thank you for giving me the floor. In Captain Sherland's concluding remark, he said that multilateralism is critical to wrestling the pandemic to the ground. And I just want to emphasize that it is indeed so. It is also an opportunity to rethink priorities and to build back better. So I just wanted to underscore that point, that it is critical that the multilateral system be fully engaged, and we must continue to advocate for such. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. And I certainly want to thank all of you for participating in today's discussion. I think we had very frank discussions that would go a long way in preparing us to master the challenges posed by COVID-19. It has affected the world. There are no world leaders or no, except from the WHO, that we can take guidance from. I think we have done a very good job in managing it. Now it's time to manage it and put the protocols in place to reopen and stimulate our regional economies. Because as we all recognize, the most vulnerable must be protected. So once again, I want to thank you, and I hope we can feel free to call on you again should we require to establish more discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you. Peace
Thank you very
profound,
much.
everyone.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks to everyone. Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Suzanne. Sorry. Hi. Okay. 1 second. No, I was talking to Suzanne.